All right, we're going to do the quickest overview of the remaining amendments after the Bill of Rights, the 11 through 27. I'm going to tell you easy ways you can remember this. Don't get down in the weeds. You want to go back to history class and figure out how some of these happen, go ahead, but we're just going to keep it simple. All right, so we have the 11th Amendment. It says here in my slides, sets the official jurisdiction of the federal courts. Here's the easy way to remember it. The 11th Amendment states can't sue other states, okay? Technically they can, but what that means is a state can sue another state if it's done in the state being sued, okay? This is about the most you need to know about the 11th Amendment. So states can't sue other states. You've got a little cartoon there. Focus in on that. Burn that into your brain. The 12th Amendment, you may remember this from American I history class. The 12th Amendment you have in 1796, you have the election, you've got John Adams, you've got Thomas Jefferson running. The way the Constitution was set up with the electors in the electoral college is they did kind of a first place, second place thing. Now, John Adams has a different guy running on his vice presidential ticket, but that guy doesn't come in second place. Thomas Jefferson does. So who ends up president? John Adams, second president of the United States. Thomas Jefferson, the vice president. Wouldn't have been a weird deal. They were kind of friends, but here's the strange thing. They were both from different political parties. So you couldn't imagine this today, right? Having a Republican president and a vice president that's a Democrat. But back in the day, John Adams, he's the Federalist. Thomas Jefferson, he was of that political party. At the time, we're calling it the Democratic Republicans. Doesn't really exist today, but we're getting in the weeds. We're keeping it simple. So really, the 12th Amendment is basically now what we do today, which is the president and the vice president, they run on the same ticket, and when the electors go cast it, you can see the little political cartoon there, they're going to cast a separate ballot for a presidential candidate and a vice presidential candidate. So we're always going to now have the vice president is going to be of the same political party. Usually, Lincoln, figure out your trivia there from your history class. But this is the basics of it. How can you remember the 12th Amendment? 1, 2 for the 12th Amendment. We did away with the first, second place system. Clever, right? 11th and 12th kind of lost to history. All right, now we're going to move to our 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Tell me you remember your Reconstruction Amendments. These happen, really the 13th is happening as the Civil War is still going on, but that process of the North reconstructing the South after the Civil War, after slavery, is going to be abolished. So the 13th Amendment, you better know this from U.S. history. I don't need to cover it much further. The abolition of slavery, or as it says in the actual primary source, involuntary servitude, unless for the punishment of a crime. That's a whole nother loophole. Netflix, the 13th, the documentary, put it on your list. So abolition of slavery is the 13th Amendment. The 14th Amendment, all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens. So we free the slaves. The next step is make them citizens, because if you remember, they're not considered citizens. Dred versus Scott, they're considered property. No good. So the 14th Amendment, born in the United States, they're naturalized citizens. And also, this is key, guaranteed equal protection under the law. This is so important. I'm going to highlight it here. This is where you get the due process clause of the 14th Amendment, similar to the due process clause in the 5th Amendment. So this is huge. And then 15th, now that we have freed the slaves and we've made them citizens, well, obviously the next logical step is going to be that no person can be denied the right to vote on the basis of race. Well, this is a little oversimplifying. Male persons. Okay, women still aren't going to get the right to vote. That's going to be another amendment coming later. So this is African-American men can now be or can no longer be denied the right to vote based on race. So those are those Reconstruction Amendments. Just follow that logical order. Here, free the slaves, make them citizens, grant them equal protection, and then finally get the right to vote. These are all the 1860s, right? All right, more amendments. Moving in, 16, 17, 18, 19. These are going to be our progressive era amendments. If you remember, this is around maybe the 1890s to about 1920. We're going to see lots of progress in the nation. We have a lot of this is happening more in the Northeast, but we have lots lots of people saying from that Gilded Age, I'm not enjoying how things are. I want to make sure we fix things and see some progress here. All right, I had to get some pictures in there. Why didn't I have pictures? I'm the progressive era. All right, so 16th Amendment allows for the income tax. We got a little newspaper article there to show that. Basically, look, the income tax, we all have to pay it today. That's the FICA on your paycheck if you've seen it. But these progressive eras, and by the way, this was an idea actually proposed by the populist farmers, if you remember those guys, the populist farmers, back in the late 1800s. But this income tax is finally going to be something, it's going to bring in more income to the federal government. Without going into too many details on this, the idea is that, the federal government, we have progress, we have things we need to do for the country, and an income is going to help. And by the way, how do you remember these? I keep forgetting on some of these. Well, this is simplifying, but when you turn 16, that's when you can legally get a job, right? And when you turn 16 and you can legally get a job, you're going to have to start paying an income tax. So that's how you can remember that. The 17th Amendment. We're going to change the way in the progressive era that people elect senators. No longer are they going to be handpicked by state legislators. That system was a little bit corrupt. It was kind of anti-democratic. So now what we're going to have is the people, like we do today, like we're going to do in November, the people go and they directly cast a ballot for a senator in their state. For senators, they are in office for 6 years. Every 2 years, we have election for senators for 33 of them. Remember, we have 100 senators. The 18th Amendment, I know we remember this from history class. Oh, and by the way, how do you remember the 17th is the direct election of senators? Well, you got that SE in 17th, that SE in senators, jog your memory, election of senators. The 18th Amendment, hey, when you turn 18, you're an adult, right? Well, but you still can't drink alcohol. That's how you're going to remember the 18th Amendment was the prohibition of alcohol. Crazy times, right? You remember that from your American too? Kind of happened over time, state by state. A lot of states banned alcohol, and eventually there was enough votes. 2/3 proposed that amendment for prohibition, and ultimately 3/4 of the state ratified it. And so we had a ban on alcohol for 13 years in this country. How crazy is that? We'll get to the amendment, the only amendment to ever repeal another amendment. We'll get to that in a few. The 19th Amendment, women's suffrage. What does that mean, suffrage? Hopefully you remember that from American history. That's the right to vote. So even though in these progressive era amendments, women, I like to say this how I remember the 19th. Well, one, it was passed in 1919 is when it was proposed. But also of your progressive era amendments, those 4, ain't it just the truth that women always get all these rights last? So they have to wait past 16, past 17, past 18, and they get the right to vote. All right, so we've got the 20th, the 21st, and the 22nd. So the 20th Amendment, this one's easy to remember, the 20th Amendment, the presidential inauguration date was moved to January 20th. It was a little bit further on down the road is what they normally had, but, we're getting up there in the years, and it does not take a million years for the president to make his way to live in Washington, D.C., in the Capitol. So we're going to move that inauguration date up. We have a little picture here. Let me bring this guy in. The lame duck. This will help you remember the 20th Amendment. The lame duck is that period they say a president, let's say he's no longer going to be in office. So the election is in November, and then between the November election and January 20th inauguration date, he's a lame duck. There's not a whole lot he can do, right? Everybody knows he's on his way out. So remember the 20th inauguration date, you can think of it that way. The 21st Amendment, this is where finally, after 13 years, America says, enough, let's all have a drink. So in 1933, partially spurred by the Great Depression and the need to collect taxes on alcohol, prohibition ends. And today, when you turn 21, you can legally drink. So that's a weird coincidence, but it's an easy way to remember the 21st Amendment repealed prohibition. The 22nd Amendment, the president can only serve 2 consecutive terms or 10 consecutive years. This actually happens after Franklin Roosevelt was president. Remember, this was our one president. 4 elections, elected 4 times. Very widely loved, but after he's out of office, the general sentiment becomes, as you know, we're always worried about tyranny and presidents never leaving office. So an amendment is passed that says a president can only serve 2 consecutive terms. That's 8 years. Or if he comes in office as a result of a vice president, dying or being assassinated or something, then 10 years, you could tack on those 2 years depending on when he came into office. All right, wrapping up our 23rd to 27th. Some of these deal with voting rights. I think you had a question on that on another activity we did. The 23rd Amendment. Citizens of Washington, D.C. now get electoral votes in the Electoral College. They actually get 3 according to this amendment. So think the 23rd Amendment, D.C. gets 3 electoral votes in presidential elections. Weirdly today still, and some students wonder this, this is on the license plate of many D.C. residents. It says taxation without representation, that sort of holdover from the American Revolution. While they do get to vote for president, they do not have representatives, voting representatives in Congress, which is kind of odd. The 24th Amendment outlawed the poll tax. That 24th Amendment, if you remember, the poll tax was a way that people were able to prevent, mainly it was for African Americans, being able to make it harder for them to vote. This, of course, affected anybody that couldn't pay the poll tax. So the 24th Amendment is going to get passed. There is no poll tax. You cannot charge people to vote anymore, according to the Constitution. I want to say this is in the 1860s, around the time of the Voting Rights Act. The 25th Amendment, this is going to happen coincidentally around the Nixon administration, not because of his dealings in Watergate, but the 25th Amendment is going to set the order of presidential succession. That means who becomes president if the president dies, leaves office, etc. There's some other provisions in this, but we're keeping it simple here. So 25th Amendment, presidential succession. We now, of course, know president dies or leaves office, you're going to get the vice president is going to take his place. If the vice president, it's going to be the Speaker of the House. That's the head of the majority party in the House of Representatives, so on and so forth. It goes down through the presidential cabinet. You can Google it if you're interested. The 26th Amendment, this is a kind of post-Vietnam era amendment, or during Vietnam. Basically, of course, soldiers during Vietnam are saying, you're going to draft me and I'm going to go and have to fight a war, which I have no say in, but I can't even vote for the very representatives that are choosing to send me off to war. Remember, Congress has the power to declare war. So crazy, right? So this is going to get a huge momentum through protest and everything. And finally, the 26th Amendment will get passed that lowers the voting age to 18 years old. And finally, the 27th Amendment. This one is, again, one that you'll almost never hear anything about after this. Congress cannot pass pay raises for themselves that will take effect in the same session as its something that is running off the page. Oh, as its passage. Edit. So basically, this deals with pay raises. It's weird, right? Who gets to decide how much money Congress makes? They get to decide. They're the lawmakers, right? So this is going to be a little fix in that. I have no idea the outdated PowerPoint why we have a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger voting for himself in an election that he's no longer in office for, but there you go. So those are the remaining ones. Here's the big ones that we'll see coming up in court cases in another unit. We're going to see the 14th Amendment is super key. Equal protection. You're going to see that in lots of court cases. That'll be used in desegregation cases, things like that. So, the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote. All these voting amendments are key because, of course, in a democracy, people have the power by voting. But 14th Amendment is huge. Jesus, that's the one that really stands out actually in civics. I think a lot of these are more, in history, we talk about these with the time, but yeah, so your Reconstruction amendments are big. Watch this again. Make sure you have notes. We're going to play a bingo, an online bingo on another day, and you're going to have to hear a description like this amendment lowered the voting age to 18, and you're going to look on your bingo card and you're going to say, I got that, 26. So make sure you have some familiarity with these, and you'll be good to go.